Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. Today we have Mark Herschberg, who has joined me again for a second time. So thank you very much, Mark. You are a CTO, speaker, author, and MIT instructor. Thank you very much for joining me today. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Absolute pleasure. We were just talking before we came on how long ago it is that we spoke. It seems like literally yesterday that we spoke, but you were telling me it's about 6 months. So look, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm going to start somewhere slightly different than I usually start. And we're going to talk about media and the different types of media that we have. So social media, podcasts, books, and sort of YouTube and different avenues. What do you see as the future of short content and long content?
I think media is about to undergo a revolution. If you think about media, the history of media, it really hasn't changed that much in a couple thousand years. We've had books, and we've had books for a while. We went to ebooks, which is kind of the same idea. It was just a little more digital, maybe easier to carry around. We've had movies and radio, which are audio and visual forms of a book. We have audiobooks now, but they're all effectively the same thing. It's taking content and putting it in a linear order, start to finish. And that's the really only way you can access it. What we can finally start to do is create nonlinear access to content. And if you think about, let's take nonfiction. We can talk about fiction as well. Let's take nonfiction content.
Yep.
A business book like the one I wrote, or a self-help book, where you read the information is not where you need the information. And so the problem is you sit on your couch, read it first page to last, and then at some time in the future, you need something from some part of the book or the podcast or the movie, but it's not there readily available. And we need to change up how, when, and where we access media.
So answer me something. As a saying in the UK, if it's not broken, why fix it? And my question to you is, yeah, I see books and the whole usage of books, even podcasts. We have a start, middle, and end of a podcast. YouTube videos, they're all content that has always been consumed in that process of a start, middle, and end. And some of us create social media contents, which are short clips of these videos, but that's what's actually been changing, the advent of Instagram, Twitter, and now things like TikTok, where people are taking the long format, which we always used to have. If you wanted to listen to a podcast, you logged onto a podcast platform and listened to it start to end. What do you think the change is now with things like social media, which are meaning that the clips are now, and I suppose my question to you is, are those clips just adverts for the full length content, or do you think they actually stand as a piece of content as well?
A lot of questions in there to unpack.
There was.
First, come on, your podcast. What do you mean if it ain't broke, don't fix it? We are entrepreneurs. Our whole job is to envision a future, envision something better, even if it's working okay now.
Yes.
So we don't rest our feet when we say, well, it's good enough. Now, when we think about social media, I think it is ads for the content, and that's totally fine. That's why here's a little teaser. That's great. But we need to think of a different way to utilize the content. Because the problem with social media, it's great. It is a good tool. And by the way, books, I'm still a bit of a Luddite. I buy physical books. I don't read ebooks. Okay. So I'm not saying we have to toss these all and get rid of them. They have their place. I like the physical book. Social media is what it is, and there are pros and cons. But here's the thing. Imagine some thought leader who gives some great advice on leading a company through change. And so this guy posts his quote, or a quote from a guest on your podcast gets posted at some time and date. Well, the audience who sees that, half of them don't even see it because they weren't on social media that day, or there was something else, or the algorithm didn't surface it. The ones who did see it, some of them said, yeah, that sounds great, but I am focused on hiring, or I'm focused on getting my customers, or we did a big change and we're good now. This is not relevant to me. And so they don't pay attention. But then 6 months later, they're undergoing a change. They could use that advice then and there, but they don't think, well, let me scroll back through 6 months of social media posts of everyone I follow and hope I find it. Social media is a linear, temporal order, and social media is push. We push our content when and where we think it's relevant. What we want is a pull model where the content consumer says, I need this content here and now to be relevant. Let me give you an example. If you think back to Google Glass, now Google Glass had all sorts of problems, but the general concept is called augmented reality. Yep. I'm walking down the street, I see you, I go, oh, wait, I know that guy. All right, what's his name? Well, augmented reality pulls up your name. It pulls up, when was our last podcast recording? Pulls up the name of your daughter. Maybe, oh, you had an anniversary recently. I go, hey, it is great to see you, Mark. And boy, you just had an anniversary, didn't you? By the way, how's your daughter? And I've got all there because I needed it in that moment. I didn't even know I needed it 5 minutes before. But I can pull information relevant to me at that moment. And that's what we need to do with media and information in general, is create more of these pull models so it is contextually relevant.
I get that. So social media specifically also is very push related. I'm pushing, and I do think that the push method, like when I produce stuff for social media for clips, they are to push people to go and listen to the podcast or go to YouTube and watch it. But they're now creating a space where if you get enough views, if you get enough listens of the social media, you can then build a business from that as well. And I just think it's quite interesting that, yes, my primary idea is to funnel everyone to the podcast or to the YouTube channel. But actually, the short form content, and this is where I wanted to just explore, where do you think people's attention is going to when when they're consuming longer format or shorter format?
What do you mean by where are their attention? You mean which do they prefer?
Well, where do you think people are going? Do you think people will always, like you said, you love books, you love you love reading books, and some of my interested people that have seen social media content will go to the podcast or the YouTube channel, but you're able to now create a whole industry, a whole business, and in a way, like for example, TikTok or Instagram. If I get enough followers, I can create a business out of that. And actually, the shorter form content, people might never go to my podcast and they'll just sit on watching those 2-minute clips on social media. So where do you see the sort of people's attention going? Do you think we'll always stick to the longer format, or do you think the millennials are just mainly focusing on this sort of 2-minute content on social media?
I would compare media to food. We have healthy, full meals that you and I grew up on, and then we have a snacking culture. The quick and easy, whether it's the Lunchables, here's your set snack, whether it's a Twinkie or other, oh, this is yummy, this is quick, this is easy, I don't have to prepare it. And we love snacking. And I know I probably snack more than I should. But we also know if you're only snacking, if you're just getting that quick food, that pre-prepared food, you're probably not getting as nutritious a diet as you really should for health. And so we think about media, quick hits are great. Oh, that's an interesting idea. That's a good idea. Whether it's that 30-second clip, 2-minute clip, even hour-long podcasts like what we're doing, go, hey, that was some good idea. But then you just walk away from it. And that's different than if you were to take a class online, in person, and week after week, you're really thinking through these ideas, you're getting deeper into it, you're focusing on it. That's where you're getting more of that nutrition. And I think there's room for both, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I am having my 3 well-set meals, sure, I'll snack once in a while because I'm hungry or enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And so we can get that additional information, but I think there's room for both. We just have to not fill up on junk food.
I think that's a really good analogy. And I just want to go back to the pull and pull method of media, because I think this is really important, because you're just creating a new product at the moment called Brain Bump. So where do you see the importance of that pull side of media, and how are you actually going to solve that problem or help solve that problem with your new product?
As an entrepreneur, I put my money and time where my mouth is. So there is a need for this type of media engagement. And so we created the Brain Bump app. Brain Bump, it's like a nudge for your noggin. The idea is that content creators, which means authors, bloggers, podcasters, speakers, class creators, people who create content, we put it out there. Now, all too often, someone will read a book and say, that's great. And they finish the book and they forget a few weeks later. I wanted them to have the information available to them. And so Brain Bump works in 2 modes, which relate to what we've been talking about. First is that just-in-time access. So my book, you might remember, The Career Toolkit, I've got a chapter on networking tips. Okay, that's great. Everyone wants to get better at networking. The problem is you're reading the book sitting at home. You're not doing a lot of networking at home. You already know your dog, got a long-standing relationship. You need those tips a month later when you're going into an event. You're saying, what were those tips? How do I network? So with the Brain Bump app, you can pull up the app, you pull it out of your phone, and right there you go to networking. We've got everything tagged, so you can look for tips tagged with networking. Great, there are the tips. And you just quickly flip through it on your phone. 5 minutes before you walk in the room, you get that just-in-time information that you need. The other mode is more foundational. You read the book. Now I have other chapters on leadership, on management. You can't always know, I have to lead in 5 minutes. Let me just pull out those tips. We really need to build up foundationally. We know the best way to retain information is through spaced repetition. Fancy name for look at the content again. It's right. Why in school we all open the book a couple times before the test, but no one's going back and listening to a podcast 2 or 3 times or rereading the book. In fact, even people who take notes, and I take notes in my book, most people, when I talk to them, they take notes, but they never look back at. So the other way the app works is it takes all these key ideas, all these tips from the content that we provide for you, and then it will surface them at a time you request. So you might have, for example, you want to get a management tip each day at 9 a.m. as you walk into the office. Takes 2 seconds. You don't even need to open the app. You get that little pop-up. Go, oh, right. There's a management tip. Great. Swipe it away. You're done. We only send notifications when you request it. Say, I want that management tip in the morning. I want a networking tip at 5 o'clock when I go off to the bar. Or maybe you want a marriage tip. Right now we're business content, but you can imagine in the future, marriage tip at 6 p.m. when you come home from the bar. So you get what you need when and where you need it.
And what's really important about what you're saying is it's the action bit, which is what people still consume media, podcast, YouTube videos, and books very passively. And that's my biggest challenge with a lot of people that are reading a book a week. How much of that are you actually absorbing? How much? And I used to, I have to say, when I was going through a self-development stage of doing lots of business and content and things like that I was watching, I would actually take notes on my phone. It would be written. So we need to get people's engagement to actually get those prompts. And I used it by writing notes. You said you use that by writing notes. But what your tool is actually doing is you can preempt those that need to pull that information on those specific areas. How are you actually going to get that functionality? How does it actually work in the app? Maybe you can tell me a little bit more.
The content creators, the authors, podcasters, and others take the key ideas from their content, from their books, from their other content, and they put it onto the server. As an app user, and the app is free, by the way, as an app user, you go and say, I want the tips from this book, this podcast, this talk. We don't require that you bought it. Everything is free. And so you can download either for ones you've engaged with already, books you've read, or you might say, here's an awesome podcast. The title looks interesting. I can see a little information. I'm going to add it. I had never listened to it before. I never bought the book, but you can still add it. And you have access to those tips, either in that just in time, pull it up, search or filter for the subset that you want, or you get that daily push to get it pushed to you when you need. So we do the work for you. You don't even have to take your own notes because we provide it for you. And more importantly, we serve up the notes because that's the step most of us miss. I'm guessing, how often do you look back at the notes that you take?
There are certain books that I have taken notes and gone back to. One that springs immediately to mind is the Negotiation book by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. That's something I've gone back to. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I've gone back to the notes on that. To an extent, the 4-Hour Work Week with Tim Ferriss and things like that. So there are books that I've taken notes on that I kind of know the importance of, and I go back and refresh. But there's things like, I think one of your competitors in a similar way is something like Blinkist that sort of does the summary for you of your books that you're looking at. How are you going to counteract that? I know you do other services like podcast blogs and things like that, but how are you going to compete in that market?
That's a great question. So Blinkist, for those who don't know, it is a book summary app. There's literally dozens of apps that do that. We're different in a few ways. First, we are not just books. We're all sorts of mediums. Second, we are free and we will always be free. Blinkist, they technically have a free tier, but I think you have very limited access.
It's not even worth doing.
Exactly. So you're paying a couple dollars a month, whereas we are free. But then the other key point, Blinkist, it is instead of the book. So I'm going to read the summary. Now, they like to say, oh, no, we help authors because we promote the books. Authors hate Blinkist and other apps. First, because they can summarize the book without the author's permission. Summary is fair use. And if you read the book summary, you're probably not reading the book. That's the whole point. You got the book summary app, so you don't have to read the book.
Well, I will
They're
challenge
all,
you. I will challenge you on one thing. Sorry to cut across you.
no, please.
One of my business partners actually uses Blinkist as a summary. He reads it and consumes it. I like what I've seen in the summary. I will go out and buy the book. And so there are people that are using that as a prompt for purchase. And I know almost certainly people can do this with your app as well. They could see a summary or get inspired by with the points that they're making on the book. Let's just use books for this example. And then they can then go and purchase. So my question is, how are you going to attract the authors, the podcasters, the YouTube, the bloggers to actually put their content on Brain Bump?
Yeah. First, to your point, there are a handful of people who do that, but they are a tiny percentage.
Okay.
For most people, it's an alternative, not a precursor.
Okay.
We are designed to be a supplement. Now, again, we don't say, oh, you have to prove you bought the book. You can get anything. But we're not designed to be an alternative to. And in fact, so if you look at my book, I've got about 400 tips. If you would rather flip through 400 tip cards instead of reading my book, you are welcome to do so. But I think it works better when you've read the book and they say, I want to retain it by going back and doing this. So authors will want to join this for a few reasons. Remember, most authors don't make money selling their books. There's a secret of the publishing industry. Now, I'm a little different than most. I have my book and that's it. I am not trying to be an executive coach. I'm not trying to sell consulting services. I've got my book. Hopefully it helps you. That's it. But most people say, oh, no, the book is how you get to know me. And then I'm going to charge you $5,000 for my consulting. That's where they're really trying to get you. And this creates a longer engagement. Because if you just read the book, close the book, you're done with that person. But here you're creating a longer engagement. You're continuing to see their content and building up that brand awareness, which is what content creators want. The other thing that we do, if you think back to podcasts and blogs, we mentioned social media is temporal. No one is looking at your social media posts from a year ago, unless you said something horrific and everyone's complaining about you. But your content is evergreen. I'm sure you've got great episodes from 6 months ago, like ours, but other episodes as well, where that is just as valuable today and will be valuable in 2 years. But people are generally looking at the head. They're looking at what's most recent. Because we're not ordered by time, someone can see a great tip, say, I like that. I want to learn more, and jump instantly, because we link everything, click the link and they go right to the episode to hear it, right to the article to read it, or right to the buy link to go buy the book. So we help take content in a different medium and really see the app as an extension of the content and the user's engagement with your content.
Are you looking for your users to sit down and go through the tips for a podcast? Let's just use a podcast for this example. Go through that using my podcast. They go through our previous episode, our previous conversation, and look at the tips there. Are you expecting people to spend time going through let's just say we came up with 20 tips on our previous interview, or are you looking to your expertise as a CTO, as a speaker, that they're going to be the tags that people are going to get pushed information if they need it? I'm trying to work out what the user's experience, the best user experience that you're going to have for them.
It's those two models. It's the just-in-time access and it's the foundational. So the just-in-time, we talked about, for example, networking tips before going to a networking event. Maybe you're thinking of updating your resume. So you would look for tags with resume and let me get some resume tips. Or I'm thinking of social media marketing. Where are social media marketing tips? And you're pulling that right as you need it, generally looking over minutes to hours, maybe a few days of what's coming up. And you need information that's contextually, temporally relevant. But then there's that foundational, I want to be a better manager. And so just every day, I want to just get another management tip. It's think of it like the word of the day calendar. It's not that, okay, I've got this word and I have to use it today, and that's my only day I use it. You get a different word each day, and over time, your vocabulary builds up. Each day, you get a different tip. And over time, you start to retain this and you start to link those ideas, and you get stronger as a manager or whatever it is those tips are about.
Are you going to have suggested items? So say there's an interview with you and it pops up my interview with you, but then it pops up my business partner, George McGarren. It pops up him because he's got experience as an entrepreneur. Will you have sort of links from your interview to someone else's interview to someone else? Like, is there going to be a connection for the user to be suggested other items?
Down the road, that is certainly something. There's a whole laundry list of things
you have to build at some stage for the suggested items.
And so right now, our primary modes, everything's organized by content,
right?
The podcast, the blog, the talk.
Yeah.
It's organized by topic. Think of those like hashtags, but we could also organize it, let's say, by guest. The guest on this podcast, what else have they done? This author, what other books have they written? So we can go lots of different ways, and I'm sure we'll be building that in. What we build, how soon, depends on feedback from our users.
I would say that as feedback, and we're open shop here, sort of as a suggestion. I would say that actually is because it actually takes a bit of the stress off the user if he knows that he's going to come to our interview and hear about media, and then he moves to another suggested episode on media or tech or whatever. That I would say as a sort of longer term plan, and I get you're building something for a specific, or you've got two purposes that you're using at the moment, but being able like that always like very basic Amazon, the experience you go on Amazon and you buy something and then suddenly it says, oh, other people liked this item and that item. And there's a lot of continuity for the user to be able to see what the next thing that other people like as well. But it's a TBC to be thought about.
And one interesting challenge when you're building this type of platform is, of course, as the amount of content grows, you need to adjust the interface. Think about Amazon. When they were just selling books, it was a simpler interface than what they have now. And so as we're starting out and we've got scores of content, okay, that's still something you can kind of, if you've spent a few minutes, you can look at all our content and decide. But as we get to hundreds and later thousands, we're going to need a different interface. And we'll start to add in things like leaderboards, like what is the most popular or most popular by this topic. But you don't want that complex interface day one. Like, this is complex and you've got three things. Why are you doing this? Yeah. So we'll be constantly, as we continually add new content, we're like a streaming service in that way. It's just always new content gets added, but we'll be revising the interface to adjust to the level of content that we have.
And can you search? Can you search by tags, by topics?
Yes, you can search. So when you are looking through the tips, everything is tagged. Again, think of it like a hashtag. Yeah. And you can search for a particular hashtag either within content. So you just want leadership tips for my book, or you can go across the content you've added. You say, I need leadership tips, and I frankly don't care if it's your book, her podcast, his blog. Just give me leadership tips. So you can already today go by tag and then find all the relevant content.
What is, and I'm sure you've thought about this, but what is the USP? If you had to put it into a couple of sentences, what would you say your USP is?
Remind me USP in this context.
Unique selling point.
The unique selling point is that we provide the information when and where you need it at minimal effort. In theory, those notes you've taken on books, I presume they're on some cloud drive, and so they're in your phone, and you could pull out your phone and open it up and search through it and find it. But that's literally taking anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot. If we're having a conversation or if I'm racing to do something, I don't necessarily have the 30 seconds to say, let me go dig through and find that information. We do it in seconds. You can open the app and closer to 3 or 4 seconds is when you can find it. Or you have that daily push where you don't even need to open the app. You don't need to do anything. It's there when you've asked for it. And so it's that access to information that is really unique.
And are you inspired by sort of streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and Disney? Are these things that you're using as a sort of inspiration for?
Little bit. If you think about what the app does, it's like a cross between a book summary app, a flashcard app, and a daily affirmation app. And so we take ideas from those. We take ideas from streaming services. I think there are good ideas. As entrepreneurs, we should always be looking outside our direct industry or domain for ideas from others that we can incorporate to provide more value to our customers. And so I think from the streaming service, we definitely get a growing content library and access to it. But honestly, I don't think if you look at those services, they're not all that innovative. They made things accessible. I could do it on demand online, but even their search functionality is pretty basic. There's no way to do, oh, here's what my friends are doing. There's a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit that we've seen in other services that they haven't even implemented yet. So I don't think I pay attention to them. I don't think they're my leading inspiration for this because we can do so much more. We're already doing more than what they're doing.
And so you were an engineer in your past life. How much of this has come from your engineering sort of background on how to approach something like this sort of product?
I still think of myself as an engineer, and I still actually build tech startup companies. And it's interesting, when I was thinking about the need, I looked at and brought in experiences from engineering, from work in media, from my experience teaching and understanding learning processes, and as putting it all together, I really thought someone must have done this. Someone must have created a way to surface ideas from a book. I'm just going to go and license it. Or I'll just put my book on it. Someone must have done this because it's kind of obvious when you think about it. And I was shocked that didn't exist. So we filed a patent on it and then built actually a prototype version. And we may have mentioned this in the show we did 6 months ago, that with my book, with the Career Toolkit book, there is the Career Toolkit app. That's this idea, but it's just for my content. And that was the prototype to see, would people use this? Do they like it? Get some feedback. And when we got positive feedback, we said, okay, now we can do a general version. I think that like the Kindle version, because we can take content from any source.
And how do you personally learn? Are you a visual person? Are you a reading person? Are you audio? What's your best way of being able to learn?
I think it depends on the nature of the content. I do like reading books. I have a pretty good audio memory, and I'm a very visual person, as many engineers are. If it's a deep thought, if it's the kind of things I need to reflect on and think about, I'm more likely to want to read it and then let it sink in, or I can pause my reading and think about it. And so I think that's probably my preferred method. That said, I can't read when exercising. I can listen much easier. And so I'll do that, I think, more frequently just because of the accessibility. But visually, I do think of things very spatially. I'm not a video person, though. I really, when I read news, for example, like there's a video and there's an article, I will always go right to the article.
Interesting. And what are you, investment-wise, are you looking at some stage to get investors? Because tech startups are notoriously difficult to start, expensive to run until you make a profit. What's your sort of longer term strategy for investment side?
There's a couple options we're considering. So my background, of course, is building tech startups, and I've gone out and I've raised tens of millions of dollars in a round. I've scaled companies. For this, I could have gone out and done an early round and just said, hey, give me money to build it. I had enough technical knowledge and I had enough capital on hand that we were able to get this early version out. We've got up, it's live, it's running. We're constantly adding new users and new content. So now I've got some growth. And of course, if you do go and get capital, it's always better to do so from a position of strength.
Yeah.
I'd get better terms today than if I said, I have an idea, I'm going to draw it on a napkin.
Yeah.
We can get better terms later. As long as we're still getting growth, that's going to put us in a better position. Obviously, more capital lets me grow faster. And it's just figuring out when it makes sense for us to do such a raise.
Right. As it's the second interview, I'm going to flip the conversation from you to me. We're going to do a pull difference of the pull push. As a content provider, I produce social media content. I produce podcasts, YouTube videos. What question you've got access for me to answer any question you like. For you, what's the most pertinent question that you would want to ask a content creator?
Here's a question that the entire audience should be thinking. When you've got all your content, all these channels, how do you think about using them? How much effort do you put into it? What's the ROI that you're looking at from, I guess you'd say in general, or from specific channels? How do you think about your content strategy?
So it's really interesting because what I find is new listeners, especially on the podcast, I attract someone through any mechanism, searching or whatever. They find my content, and because it's evergreen content, it's never specifically based on a particular time. I find that I get spikes where new listeners go back and download 100 episodes, 150 episodes. I've got 390, I think, in total, something like that. So one of the things that I find is that because of the evergreen nature, people just go and they just then download and then they absorb it over a period of months, weeks, months, or whatever. So for me, it's really important. Because I was initially thinking to answer your question saying they all have quite short. It's quite fickle in the sense of people come in, they'll see whether they like you, and sometimes I consume content, and I'll go through a couple of people that I like listening to. Oh, that's interesting. I know that person. I want to hear what he has to say, or she. And so I'll go through some of my content providers that I listen to and say, oh, I'll cherry pick the ones that are most relevant to me. But actually, I'm finding with my listeners that people then, if they like you, know, like, and trust you and build that trust over a period of time, they'll download all of my episodes in one go and then listen to it over months. So it's a real tricky thing, because you want to attract new listeners. And new listeners, there's always a turnover of some people drop the subscription and then move on to something else. So you're always looking for those new listeners. But actually, with the right content, that actual back catalogue can be really powerful as well.
That's long tail when we think about from a marketing perspective. So then the next question I'd want to ask, you've got someone, they showed up, said, oh, I just heard about your podcast. I listened to a few episodes. Maybe I'm going to listen to a bunch more. Then what? What is your future engagement? What's the path? What's the journey they take from I'm liking your first few episodes I've heard? Where do you want to take them to?
Well, that's a really interesting point. And a while ago, I was coaching entrepreneurs and small business owners. And so the funnel, I sort of saw listeners, the whole funnel idea, free content, moves on to a course or something, and then moves on to a VIP and that sort of mechanism and methodology. But now, because my business is run outside, I have a business which does for guests. They pay a fee as an agency to be on multiple podcasts. Yes and no, that people will go on to or might go on to that afterwards. Definitely not the real estate business. There's no marriage there. So actually, my call to action at the moment is consume more of my content, please. I've got a back catalogue of nearly 400 episodes on the podcast, probably got, I don't know, 150, 200 episodes on YouTube. Go back, absorb that. And then one of the most difficult things, and this is actually a really interesting point, one of the trickiest things, we can get a lot of demographic data about listeners, but actually feedback can be quite tricky. And this is a long-winded answer to your question, but one of the calls to actions, which I know is a massive problem for all podcasters, are getting direct conversations with your listeners. Is your app going to be able to help me with that?
Great question. And let me back up a moment, because you raised some interesting points. Your listeners are entrepreneurs, and they often want to go on podcasts, want to get exposure. And so it's important to think through, what is the journey? What is the engagement? I noted that I have a book, but I don't do coaching. And that has an important impact on my strategy. Now, I've been on over 300 podcasts just about the book. I'm now going on more. I'm coming back to some to talk about the app. But going on a podcast, you hear me, you think, oh, he sounds interesting, I'll buy the book. He's not interesting, I won't. That's it. You don't need to really hear over and over. We talk about multiple touch points in marketing, but best case scenario from a monetization standpoint is you buy my book and that's it. I've got nothing else to sell you. The book was not written to make me rich. The book was written because I've been teaching at MIT and I wanted to expand and get this wisdom into other people. It's not just for engineers, but people who are coaches, for example. You don't hear someone once and say, he sounds brilliant, I'm going to go sign up for his $10,000 coaching package. And so you need that know, like, trust that you mentioned, which involves repeated engagement. Those people are more likely to have podcasts of their own. Now, they'll go on other podcasts. You hear them. So she sounds smart. Let me start listening to her podcast. Oh, yeah, she's even smarter now that I get to know her. Now I want to hire her. So those are different brand journeys. Now, you raised the question, as a content creator, you want to better understand your users, and podcasts are notorious for telling you very little. Men and women, the country, that's about it. Maybe their ages, and most people say, well, it's 18 to 45.
This is so unhelpful.
You'd like to know, are they people at small companies, medium, large companies? What's their job function, experience level, industry? You'd love to know that because you can better target them. Books, same problem. We know even less. Amazon sold X copies yesterday. I don't even know to whom. We, as we expand, can start to get the information. Now, because I come from the tech world, and actually I've been a cybersecurity CTO, I am very, very cautious about using data of the users. I do not want to sell user data. I want to be very careful. But eventually we will start to find out more information that people can opt into. And then we can provide a little more insight than what content creators get from other channels. And we can even provide a way for connection. Because here's another thing. Authors are told, create a mailing list. Okay, now I've got your mailing list. Now I can email people. They can email you back. And in theory, if someone pays attention, they can find you online and email you, but most podcast listeners don't. And it goes back to, it would take them 30 seconds to do a web search, find your website, find your form or email. 30 seconds, that's forever. That's too much of a barrier. But if there is a one-click button, you're more likely to get feedback. And that's the type of thing that we can start to provide. And it seems silly, we're talking seconds, but it makes a big difference. And that can increase your engagement with your audience to build up that connection, to move them through that know, like, and trust.
So back onto my questions, because you could, by all means, you could answer. An interesting question I was just thinking was, a lot of people who start tech companies, and this is a wild generalization, but usually younger people that are tech savvy, that are coders, that build something. And a lot of those people that I've interviewed and I've had on my show always had an exit strategy because they wanted to build it big enough to be bought by Google, Oracle, whoever. They wanted it bought by a larger company to cash in. Now, you've had a hugely successful career in different areas. You said you bought the capital yourself onto this. Do you have an end game for your app at this stage?
I've got options. There are certainly ways where we can build it, and there are some very clear people who would acquire our company at scale. That's easy. This is not just let me go make more money. I wouldn't object to making money, and we have a very clear plan for doing that. But like the book, I think there is more value. We began the conversation talking about the future of media and how people will engage with it. If you think about it from a learning perspective, again, we read a book, we say, okay, this is great. I just invested 5 hours reading a book. And then you forget most of it 2 weeks later. What a waste. What a waste of human time and effort. And if we can help you retain even just 5% more, let alone 10, 20, 30% more, think about the overall impact we would have on society, our ability to help people, companies, the world be more efficient and effective. And that's as much of a driver for me, if not more, than the financial rewards. So maybe one day we'll build and sell, but as long as I'm not losing lots of money and if I'm having a positive impact on people, that's a win for me.
So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your target audience is probably business owners, entrepreneurs, people in careers, people within the business sector. Have you thought about trying to tap into content for students? Because I was just thinking while we were talking, it'd be great for students to have that sort of refresher, that sort of prompts as well. Have you thought about expanding into that arena?
Absolutely. And let me take a more narrow version of that question at first. We are today, at the time we're recording this in November of 2022, we are business content, entrepreneurship, marketing, leadership, personal development that ties into that. How do I be a better leader? Now, there's a whole bunch of other areas. I mentioned before, imagine if you got that marriage tip when you went home to contrast with the management tip when you went to work. We don't yet have that content. I've been actively not putting it on because this is in some sense what we refer to as a double-sided marketplace. Now, we're not selling anything, but still you have people providing their content, people looking for content. And I've built enough marketplaces to know if I have a whole bunch of books on divorce and a whole bunch of people looking for marketing, there's a mismatch and no one's happy. So we're focusing on one area, just like Amazon focused just on books to start.
Yeah.
As we expand from there, as we build up our content, we can get into other areas, including, for example, relationships, including health and wellness. We can get to other areas, including academic topics that would be better for students. And I have spoken with a few universities. As you know, I've got some university connections already from my background teaching. I've spoken with a few others about how we could eventually incorporate this into their programs, because just as you want to remember the book you read, students very much want to remember what they learned in class, at least until the final, but hopefully we can get a little past that.
So a question I usually ask when we're coming towards the end of the interview is, what's the plan for the next 2 to 5 years? And I want to ask you on this app, where do you see it in that sort of 2 to 5 year period?
We are very early. We officially launched only last month at the time we're recording this, but already are seeing great growth. And as I mentioned, we are adding every month new content and, of course, new users. So in the short term, I am just focused on content and users and just growing the platform. We mentioned, of course, that there is a whole laundry list of features, and you've named some of them. And as we get feedback from our users, both our content creators and content consumers, they'll start to direct what we should prioritize. So that's kind of the next 2 years is high growth. And then depending on really how things unfold, we can go in different directions, whether we really do have a full-on student offering, as you suggest, or whether we go in other directions, or even more broadly, I said there's going to be a real sea change in how we consume media. And I think Brain Bump is really just the first step. There is so much more that can be done. We might take it with Brain Bump. We might take it with other applications. Other people, I'm sure, are going to do similar things and move into this space. Probably not against Brain Bump directly because we have patents, but move into this idea of nonlinear content access. I think that's really going to change people's perception and really change how the space grows.
Sounds like you're having fun, Mark. Are you having fun doing this?
Very much so. And rule one of being an entrepreneur, if you're not having fun, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point to close on, because I think what you've spoken about today is a sea change. If we're going to have this sea change of where we started with media, and actually podcasts were a sea change in themselves, that on-demand radio, which is kind of what it is. I'm not a great fan of that definition, but in essence, there was a sea change within media where people could access, and that's where streaming services came from there. But I really do think that there could be a real avenue. Those prompts as well, we're setting those prompts in a week, could be an interesting avenue to really get some data to understand how people are consuming the data. I would say I understand you don't want to sell the data, but that data you're going to be collecting from the user side. The content side is slightly different because they'll provide the tips as they go along. But I think I'm not telling you how to suck eggs, because I know you're an experienced guy, but collecting that data and analyzing that data is going to be so crucial for you building this business and building it to a great level.
We do. I should have mentioned this when you asked about why should content creators come to the app. We give content creators a whole bunch of insights into how their content is being used at various levels. And that's not something you get with the book summary apps. Even if they were to share the data, which I don't think they do, because remember, they take your content without your permission. We only have content where we have permission to put it on, where you've said, yes, I want my content on here. But we give you insights into how your content is being used. And that's helpful as you plan out additional podcast episodes or additional directions you want to go in. But you're right that from the content user side, in aggregate, when users opt in to share information, we would be open to sharing that in aggregate with people where we're not violating any confidentiality.
Cool. And just, I suppose, as a closing note, we're just about to finish now. I often ask this, and I started this a little bit earlier, but I want to sort of give you the option, which I give to all the people who have been on the second time. If you've got one question that you wanted to ask me, as either as a content provider, any question, I'm completely open. Before we close, what question would you like to ask me as a host, as a entrepreneur, as a business owner?
When you think about your business or your clients, because as entrepreneurs, we should always think about not only our needs, but the needs of our clients. So for you or your clients, how might something, whether it's Brain Bump specifically, or just this concept of how media will evolve, how could that be helpful to you and your clients?
So for my podcast, any additional insight into usage would be super powerful, would be really interesting to see. People targeting particular episodes that they're looking more for. And obviously you get that with downloads. You're able to see when there's spikes, when people particularly pay attention to certain episodes. So I would say that is probably one of my ideas. The other thing is that the podcast agency, which I run, getting people on other podcasts, just being able to link that through your app might be an interesting concept. I don't have an idea off the top of my head, but just thinking that the podcasters that we have in our network, is there a way we can do something to help each other on that side? So that's just a couple of thoughts I had.
There are some definite next steps for our conversation, even after this episode is over.
Yes. Okay, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you about Brain Bump. Good luck with it. I wholeheartedly support it. I think it's a really great idea. What was really critical, which I didn't mention earlier, was you went to find what you were looking for with this type of content. It didn't exist in an app, and therefore you've built it. And as an entrepreneur, most of the situations are that you need something and it's not there, so you build it. So that's been fascinating hearing that story.
And that's how so many of us start, is we say, I have a need, and you solve it. And then you ask, do other people have the need? So I did for my book. And that one, you can still find that. It's the Career Toolkit app, also free in the stores. But then we created this general version, the Brain Bump app. I'll give you just another example of need. So Brain Bump, it's 2 words. And if you go to the Android store, Brain Bump, 2 words, great. Apple, for whatever reason, has it without a space. Even though we gave it to them correctly, for months I've been saying, correct this. And they said, well, our engineers are looking into it.
Oh.
I don't know why they can't add a space. So you have to search without a space on Apple, which is so annoying. Yeah. So we said, well, this is a problem. People won't know that.
Yeah. So
we have to overcome this problem. And so we've done things. You can go right to our website, brainbumpapp.com, and we'll direct you to the store. So I generally tell people, go to brainbumpapp.com. Don't search the store, brainbumpapp.com. But then we also made a lot of use of QR codes on our website or in the app. If I have the app, I'm telling you, oh, there's this great app, Brain Bump, you should check out. There are ways that I, from my app, can send you links or QR codes, so you don't have to search, and we get around this problem that Brain Bump with a space on Android, but no space on Apple, which is obviously very consistent.
Well, thank you very much. That was going to be the last thing I just wanted to say, like, where can people find it? So you've got the website, you do have them on Android and Apple, which is fantastic. So just good luck in the future. I'm really rooting for you. I think this is a really great idea. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me back on.
Pleasure.